Oftentimes when we talk about sustainability, people think about it as the green and the blues. So they think about the environment, they think about the oceans, and they leave it at that. So this panel is to highlight some of the work being done in sustainable transformation, sustainable energy, food security, regenerative farming, power, and just to showcase some of the work being done in this community within the realm of sustainability. I'm joined by JON LO, Josephine, Marek, and Imane, who are doing stellar work in this space, as well as myself. And I think each panelist sitting today works in a different aspect of sustainability, so showcasing the broad umbrella term. Myself working in sustainable finance, Imane in food security, Josephine in food recycling, Marek in technology, and JON in data. So to get started, it would be a good start to talk about, or tell me your definition of sustainability and why is sustainability important to you?
Hello, yeah, so my name is JON, and I'm the co-founder of a company called 505 Economics, which essentially does a lot of work in alternative data. And to really answer your question about sustainability, for me, it's about looking beyond just the greens and the blues, like you said, and also look at like other components, like social development or like governance structures, and kind of have a comprehensive view of essentially the three components of the ESGs, and really being able to have like an underlying sense of data in order to like make developments in those different areas.
Okay, I'm Marek, so I'm with Fluence. So Fluence is an energy storage technology company. Basically, we build really big battery energy storage systems to help integrate renewables to the grid. And I think JON touched pretty much on what I was going to say as well, right? So beyond, like most people think of sustainability as environmental sustainability, there is social, so social impact in terms of what you can do for communities, in terms of jobs, in terms of lifestyle and quality of life. And then there's also financial. Like all three of those elements are really important because if you don't have the other two, the environmental one on its own isn't going to fly. Not many people are willing to pay, a huge amount more for the environmental piece without the others. But the really interesting thing about the space that I work in is actually environmental is like almost a side benefit actually. Renewable energy is now the cheapest form of electricity, pretty much in 2/3 of the world. So you just need to wait to deal with the challenges of that of integrating that to the grid, and that's basically what we do.
Thank you, Marek. Josephine?
Hi, I'm Josephine. I'm the co-founder of CauliBox. What we do is that we take the hassle out of switching from disposable to reusables for companies and for users. To me, sustainable is really in the definition of the word. Sustain means to make something continue for longer. And if something doesn't continue for longer, it stops or it dies. So that applies to the planet, that applies to society. And what I try to do with sustainability is to like maybe take care of the planet a little bit longer so that it can take care of us a little bit longer.
Hi everyone, so I'm Imane. I work for Releaf, who is a startup so we create mini processing units across Africa. So the idea is that we currently play in palm oil, and so what happens is that food processing is very centralized at the moment. So in Africa and developing countries in particular, so you have all the farmers, and then most of the food processing units are very centralized in the cities. So what happens is that you have a lot of waste, right? So what we do is create mini processing units, so we're not as big as the others, but we come closer to the farmer, which limits the amount of waste and so on that you have. So we currently play in palm oil, actually, a bit of a controversial one. But the plan is to go into other crops across the continent. Right now, we operate in Nigeria, but the idea is to start expanding over the next few years. And what does sustainability to me means? I think I agree with what he was saying about environmental sustainability being more of a benefit, right? Because today, when you look at Africans, developing countries, what the farmers care about is what am I going to eat. So for me, sustainability really means food security before anything. And for me, if you aren't able to guarantee that food security, no one is going to listen to you or care about what you have to say about the environment. So I think that social aspect, especially when you play in developing countries, really, that's the most important aspect to take care of before you think about any other aspects.
On the concept of what are you going to eat today? So we've all seen the prices of strawberries on this island. But on a more serious note, the OECD expects that food prices surges are going to, in the future, hitting the frontier and developing markets the hardest. Imane, in your view, what is being done to stabilize food markets, and what do you think needs to be done more of?
Yeah, so I think for food markets, you really need to, once again, look at how the supply goes, right? So today, the reason why prices are going up, for example, during COVID, everyone will have experienced that, prices will go up because you had sustainability, so value chains were broken, many of the supplies were not able to get to where they were going to, and so therefore your prices go up. So you really need to be able to first, thinking about it from a developing country's perspective, kind of fixing those infrastructure, right? To be able to guarantee the supply that you need, to be able to get to the volumes that you need to control the prices. So that's mostly my view on this.
Thanks, Imane. Josephine, switching gears a bit. So you're a social entrepreneur and campaigner that's passionate about building a sustainable and circular food system by reducing food and packaging. Can you tell me the importance of sustainable living? And I ask this question in the context that everyone looks at sustainable living in a different manner. For some, it might look like being completely self-sufficient, so growing your own food, creating your own energy, and building your own structures. And for others, sustainable living merely means being more aware of your choices, whether that's about how you consume, where you buy from, and how you treat the earth and other living creatures. So from your perspective, what is the importance of sustainable living?
I'm actually not like a big campaigner for individual like sustainable living. I mean, like, don't go crazy. Like, don't like burn a bunch of plastic bag or something like that. But like, I think that individual person, like the liability that each one of us should have in terms of like being sustainable should be empowered by the systems that we exist in. I think, like, for example, if we take London, for example, like every single borough has different recycling rules. So like when you move from one place to another, the things that are recycled in one place will not be recycled in the other place. And no matter how hard you try to like recycle, you'll never catch up if the system is ever shifting and broken. And I think the only way that we can actually have sustainable living is if the systems are not broken, and if the government and the companies who, like 100 companies like contribute to what, like 70% of carbon emissions, actually do something about it, and we pressurize them to do that, and we change the type of policies that we have. I mean, like, yes, like if you think that if you go vegan, or like if you eat less meat, that is going to have a very, very good like contribution. But I don't think like we should like scrutinize that one person for using plastic straw, because you don't know the story. Like you don't know why they use a plastic straw. If they have like, you know, a disability where they have to use a plastic straw, like you don't know anyone's story. So like stop scrutinizing single person's like, you know, actions. But like instead, like why I created CauliBox is that I want to make the system work for the people rather than like make people work for a system. Because I've been a campaigner for like big supermarkets. They want to pin the guilt on you, you know? So don't let them get to that. Pin the guilt on them.
On the topic of systems change, Marek, as a founding member and managing director of the energy storage company, Fluence, can you elaborate on sustainable technologies? Also, what do people get wrong about energy storage in your space?
Okay, so to drop a bomb, energy storage isn't really about storing energy. You might think it is because the clue is in the name, but actually a lot of the challenges with integrating renewables are in real time. So I'll give you an example. The Irish electricity system at the moment operates on about 40% renewable energy on average across the year. By 2030, they want to get to 80%, which is a pretty insane number for a relatively small island, and pretty much all of that's coming from wind. But in order to get to like 70, 80% on average, there's going to be periods where you basically have to operate that whole electricity system 100% on renewable energy, because there are going to be times where it's not windy and it's zero, right? So it's just the law of averages. So if you want to do that, you have to let that sink in. You've got to let a whole energy system run just on wind or just on solar, hydro, whatever it is in a specific country. And in order to do that, you have to turn all of the fossil fuel plants off, all of them. Zero can be on the system for that to happen. And you can only do that with technology. So this is where like the likes of energy storage, batteries have come on, provide that flexibility and the ability to balance the electricity system in real time. So even though the wind's going up and down like this, it's possible to operate the grid smoothly. And like 3 weeks ago when I came here, my flight was, as many of you know, delayed to the point where I missed my connection in London. And that was because there was a huge storm going on over like northwestern Europe. In Ireland that weekend, they got to 96% wind energy serving the electricity demand for like a very, very short period of time, like as a peak. And again, that's only possible with technology. You wouldn't be able to do it without it. So that's the sort of system level side of things. The other aspect of it is scalability. I guess some of you know Fluence's story, but very, very briefly, we started in 2018. We grew very, very rapidly over 3 years, got to unicorn valuation, and then we IPO'd last October. So it's this really exponential growth trajectory that we've had, and we've had to change the approach actually to how we build these systems as a result of that. So we no longer actually can do things project by project. We had to create something that was like standardized, a scalable building block that we can use on any project that we're doing around the world and find a way to make it, well, more flexible, but without having to custom engineer things in each case. It's a little bit like what you're talking about as well, and Imane as well about localization, so moving to regional manufacturing, all these things, like finding ways to make things standardized, scalable, and transformational.
Marek, you've touched on a very good point on design thinking and helping with the transition towards sustainable development. Curious from the other panelists, how can we use technology to solve problems and find innovative solutions to the world's problems beyond our pocketbooks?
Yeah, so in response to that, I think there's a lot of very interesting ways that people are using technology and like the advent in data and data science to like look at problems that once were quite unsolvable. So for example, like what my company 505 Economics does is we use things like satellite technology and like machine learning to really model in like data, like related to say economic growth in areas where there traditionally was very little information. So in many parts of say sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, a lot of official data is either quite unreliable or like quite, just like not present. But that doesn't change the fact that, development aid needs to be prioritized in these regions. It doesn't change the fact that if you are expanding, like you're an FMCG company, you want to know which areas have more purchasing power. If you're doing research, you want to look at like the links between, say, income shocks and like conflict risks. So there's more and more like interesting ways of using alternative data because technology has advanced so much in the last couple of years. I'm only really talking about the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even 3 to 4, to be able to like provide this underlying layer of information that all other industries can be based upon.
Josephine, Imane?
I think a lot of people forget that data and tech is very fun. And I like most of what I do is like trying to get people to switch to a habit that they're not used to. Sustainability is very like troublesome sometimes because you need to go out of way to do something that you normally can just like throw in the bin and forget about it. Like you need to like reuse. So like what we do is that we use our data to like switch it into like really interesting data sets. Like how many trees you've grown if you like use a CauliBox. And this year you grow like 10 trees. Good for you. And like making fun noises. Like I don't know, like I think the rewards like behavior of like tech and data has been like really useful for us. And like for example, like being able to have like a whole reward system so that every time people engage with something, they save money. And I'm gonna tell you, like we're in banks, we're in quite a few banks. Bankers love for saving. They're very good at it, yeah. And like they really, really want to collect those Cauli coins. Every time that cling sound goes, they like they're very happy about it, and like they're not missing one. Whenever like some bugs happen, they will go to me, and it's like, why didn't I get that free 50p off? Yeah. So like I feel like the way that we can look at tech and data is like, for us, it's like the design bits come from like how we use it to like make the whole experience more cool, like how we use like gamification to make it into a way that people actually want to engage. Because ultimately, a lot of sustainability that like is implemented is about like influencing human behavior. And like there's nothing much that humans like more than a spectacle.
I think there is this huge belief that these days technology is all about data and all of this stuff. I think, so for me, from my experience, technology is very hardware driven, right? And when you think about it from developing countries, you can talk about being data driven and having all these crazy technologies, but actually the average farmer does not even have internet, right? They're not able to read. They don't really know how to use these very advanced technologies. So for me, it's very important to be able to adapt and understand the market that and the people that you're dealing with when you think about technology. So for example, for us, what technology means to us is we created this hardware machine called the Kraken. And what the Kraken does is that we break the palm nut into, so we process the palm nut, so we break it into palm kernel oil, and which is like crude palm oil, which we resell to other companies that then go on to make it vegetable oil, that process it into beauty products and more sustainable fuels. So I think it's very important to make that, to expand that definition of technology, right? Especially when we think about sustainability, to thinking about it also in terms of hardware and really the basic improvements that you can make to existing technologies to actually move the needle as well in those industries.
It's very interesting because I didn't ask about data. We just talked about future systems, and a lot of the things you touched on was on data. I think which is very synonymous or very mirroring the work that we do in sustainability, trying to accelerate the transition towards a green and circular economy, which is future thinking work. And oftentimes we operate in levels of uncertainty. I'm curious in your individual industries and fields, how do you find and collect data that you trust or that makes sense to the work that you're doing?
Oh, yeah, sure. So that's definitely a very good question, because in so many places there just is no official data, right? And it certainly doesn't get granular enough in a lot of cases. So really it's about being able to benchmark to areas where there is enough official data. So maybe at, say, a national level, there's trusted sources like coming from the OECD, or maybe from the Economist's Intelligence Unit, or just from more reputable sources where you're like, this should be accurate maybe like 95% of the time. And then it's like being able to have creative technologies or methods of kind of projecting downwards and being able to say, in this city or this neighborhood, we think that the level of economic growth or like GDP is something like X. And then kind of using those models, right? And being able to look at that national level from those trusted sources and be like, yeah, if it's accurate at that national level, it should also be pretty decent at that subnational level. So it's things like that. You're never going to be perfect, but the question isn't one about being 100% accurate. It's about being say 90% accurate, or like the case of having data in a lot of these places versus just absolutely no data available at that level of granularity. So it's about, that's kind of the comparison that we're looking at. So that's it's a moving question, but as you get better and better, as there are more and more reputable sources, the idea is this improves over time, and you reach closer and closer to 100% truth, even though it's not possible to be 100% accurate.
Marek, how is it in the energy space?
So we're absolutely swimming in data. Basically, an energy storage system, right? It goes down. The building block of it is pretty much what you'd think, right? They can take different forms like prism pouch cells, but you can get cylindrical ones. So the AA batteries that go in a TV remote, it's not going to be that form factor for every single energy storage project, but that's really a building block, right? So there are tens of thousands in any individual project, and each one of those you can measure like the temperature, the voltage, the current, all sorts of stuff. So typical project, every couple of seconds, we have 20,000+ data points, even for a small project. So there's oceans of data out there. And that's just for monitoring these systems. If you look at like the electricity system in general, right, that if you want to figure out how to use these batteries in the best possible way, you have to look at the whole electricity market, decide how to use them, how to dispatch them. That's an even bigger ocean of data. The challenge is finding the bits that are most relevant to actually then make use of them and make sure that you can actually use these assets in the best possible ways. So what I mean by that, to give like a concrete example, the largest part of our business that's growing actually is the digital one, which is sort of an AI-based bidding engine, which decides how to charge and discharge batteries, how to bid wind assets and solar assets into electricity markets, which is, it's not really a straightforward thing, right? There's not like one place you can sell your energy. There are loads of different exchanges. If you can do that in a really effective way, you make much more money with your asset, which might sound short-sighted, but if wind and solar make more money for every time you bid them, or a battery does, you're going to build more of them and you're going to build them quicker. And that's what we've generally found. And it comes back to your point, like you can measure that because you can look at perfect foresight, and if you look backwards at doing exactly the right thing and benchmark yourself against that based on how you actually did in the future, you can get a pretty good idea whether you're using that data effectively or not. And we have a very high percentage of like foresight of what we do, and typically that increases the amount of money you can make from anything you build like 50%. So I know that's a really dry explanation of something, but it's extremely useful as a tool to change the way we power the world.
So as you're speaking and you're talking about the market of being able to buy and sell energy storage, it made me think about net zero, the tagline of our generation. I'm curious from your different vantage points, is carbon offsetting really the only solution to achieving a net zero world? Or what do you think is the best solution? Or do you even believe in carbon offsetting or net zero?
Okay, I can go. I have this, how do I say? So I feel very somehow about net zero. So what I keep saying is net zero is a very Western conception, right? Because when you think about it today, the Western countries, so Europe and the West, have gone through their industrialization. They're at a stage where, industries are pretty much advanced. They've done everything that they need to do, and they're trying to enforce those new rules and those new ways of doing things to other developing countries that haven't gone through that industrialization yet. So no, I don't agree that carbon offsetting is the only way to get to net zero. When you think about it from developing countries' perspective, it has to be, so I think it has to be a mix of everything, right? So today, palm oil, for example, palm oil is growing like crazy, like it's never grown. It's not going to change. People still use vegetable oil. So it's really, on the one hand, finding ways to do things a bit better. So both from the social aspect, but also for the environmental aspect. So how do you train the farmers to improve their yield, which improves the way the land is used, which reduces deforestation and so on. And on the other hand, as you think about new ways of doing things, so for example, electrification rates are pretty low, right? So instead of just going for the regular ways of providing electricity, how do we think about going into alternative energy sources that are still cost efficient? So I think that's the pretty tricky part when it comes to developing countries. It's about kind of still doing things in a way that is reasonable, which to me, thinking about it in the Western way may not be, but also doing things in a way that is pretty aligned with the overall agenda of being more climate change aligned, I'll say.
I'm not a big, I think net zero can be quite a dangerous idea. It's the idea that you can keep on doing what you do and then you plant a tree somewhere else that can offset the emission. Reality is there's not enough land or trees that can actually offset the emissions that we're producing right now. And it gives space to a lot of kind of gray areas. Like using the global south as like a carbon sink where you like, evade the natural biodiversity and then grow a bunch of trees and then alter what it is like over there. I think like, I work in cycle economy, I work in reuse. The whole idea is to reduce the usage and reduce the carbon that is actually produced in the first place, rather than continuing business as usual and then trying to think of a solution to absorb those carbon. Like, I feel like one thing that is very interesting to know, for example, is like Elon Musk makes so much money just by selling his carbon credits. Like, and he's like, that's what he probably make, like, I remember, like, don't quote me on that, probably check that, is that like he makes more money like selling his carbon credits than he did selling his cars, which like I think is very questionable if you ask me. And I feel like ultimately, again, what we're trying to do is to build a system that can more elastic and can accommodate us for longer, rather than continuing what we're doing and then doing something that like is an accountancy numbers game where you can do some tricks and make it go away.
Marek, how do you feel about that statement?
Sorry.
That's okay. It's all good.
Because I've heard you being referred to the blonde Elon Musk.
That's not something I've said. It's something Alvin said.
You're more handsome.
I don't think I'm entirely mad about it, but anyway, let's put that aside. So basically the answer to this question is that there's 1,000 answers. Like, there are a lot of different technical pathways to decarbonization, and like we take these like red lines in the sand. Like they're to an extent arbitrary, right? They're based on modeling, right? 2 degrees warming, 1.5 degrees warming. To be honest, I focus much less about the climate change aspect of what I do. It's a really important aspect of what we do, but I find it just comes across really preachy to talk about it that way. So I like to focus, again, very much on like the positive near terms of what we do. And the answer is not going to be exactly the same everywhere. But again, in 2/3 of the world, already today, the cheapest electricity source you can add to an electricity system is either wind or solar. Some places it's hydro. Some places renewable resource is not the cheapest that you would add. But in the vast majority of the world, it already is, and it's getting cheaper every day as you scale up and build more and more solar, more and more wind. There's like a pretty steep learning curve, and there's plenty of room to go because renewables are only a very small part of still the overall energy mix, because we don't just use it for electricity, we use it for transport, we use it for heat, industry. So the fact that it's the cheapest thing already today in most of the world means that that's what we're going to build. As soon as you can get sort of beyond the vested interests and sort of regulated structures that stop that from happening. So I would like to focus on that. Basically, this is going to happen anyway. Let's just make it happen as fast as possible. And that's basically what we need flexibility for. Energy storage is part of that. Maybe in some places, you're going to need much, much longer duration. So things like hydrogen or compressed liquid air, there's things that can do days or weeks of storage, which you'll need if you want to get to completely 100% like renewable energy. But before we get there, let's worry about getting to 80%. 80% you can do without any long duration storage. You do it basically with batteries, and then the last 20% is going to be today, occasionally fossil fuel power plants still powering up to balance the grid. Now, it'd be great to get rid of all of them, but we don't need to do that straight away. Let's focus on the problem of today, not of like 20 years from now.
And then, so yeah, I agree with basically everything that this panel said so far, but just to add one more point on that, I think net zero should also take into account like the follow-on effects from, say, changing an emissions plan or like changing how a factory is built. Like things, for example, workforces being automated because there is better technology which enables that, which I think goes back to the original point about greens and blues, right? Like moving beyond that and having just like sustainable development encompass like other elements, like social elements, like governance structures. So yeah, I think it's also really important to also try to quantify things like that. Because there's a lot of quantification you can do with like the environmental issues that we're talking about, like measuring exactly how many emissions are happening, but things like being able to transition a workforce that has been automated away into jobs for the future. I think that's going to also be a challenge that we would definitely need to look at as well, to actually encompass like sustainable development as a whole.
My final question is, we've spent about a month on, or coming up to a month on this island. What is some concrete advancements of sustainability that you have noticed either from this island or ideas that have germinated through discussions that you've had with your peers on this island? Start with Marek.
I can start with that. So, I mean, earlier this evening we went to the art museum, and I've got one concrete example at the back of the room. I'm giving a completely free shout out here to Alex, but you see here electric scooters coming to the island. So electrification of transport is one thing. We've had some chats about that. Basically, electrification of everything is an oversimplification, but doing that allows you, provided your energy mix is sustainable or renewable, to very quickly decarbonize. So I think that's like one part of what I'm seeing just happening here organically. The bit that I think needs some work is most of this island, like it's 90% at the moment running on fuel oil. So like heavy fuel oil that's imported, or diesel, gas is imported, and it's very, very expensive to import it to islands like this. And of course, there are a lot of direct emissions, but there's also, aside from the emissions, which is a greenhouse gas, long-term impact, which is eating away at the edges of this island, like, you know, eroding the land as sea levels rise. The short-term impact of that is also health and, you know, pollution and so on associated with that. This is one of the best places in the world to be putting in wind or solar. Like, the resource is amazing, and we've had island systems that are similar to this, where if you put in batteries with it, you can reduce that. Okay, not 100% straight away, but like 60, 70%. 70% of what is a very, very, very expensive thing to import here as a reduction would do a huge, huge step forward in terms of environmental sustainability. But coming back to the other things, it will reduce cost and like the social element of it, right? You know, cost of living here is, I think we all know, a big deal. So anything you can do to help there is important. So been having some good chats around that on the island as well.
Never thought I'd say Bermuda needs a cash printing machine more than ever. And I think it's in the form of sustainability. Imane, Josephine, or John, any other final remarks?
Yeah, so like I'm sure you all know about the Twizzies that are a very interesting feature of Bermuda. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's actually not possible to rent a Twizzy in many other areas, or I think it only exists in Bermuda. I was looking up current EV. I think it's only a Bermudan thing. So that's obviously like a very useful thing. And then what I found quite interesting about Bermuda is they also have laws, right, which prevent a household from owning more than one car. So there's like a cap on the total number of cars that one can own. So it's a very interesting place, which I think has a lot of right direction in terms of sustainability in many cases.
I'm going to need to report to you tomorrow because I'm having a conversation with like nonprofits on essentially limiting plastics on Bermuda tomorrow. So I'm very excited to talk to a bunch of like small businesses about what ideas they have and what they want to do and what they want the island to provide for them. So I'm excited about that. And also the roofs. The roofs are already like freaking brilliant.
+1 for that. That's so cool.
I know, right?
the
That's
rain
the coolest thing
drainage.
ever.
Yeah.
I love that. I wish I have those roofs. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So I echo what everyone was saying about electrification. That has been really good to see, the Twizzies, the government policy as well about one car per household. So putting my food security hat again, I don't know, to me it's crazy. The fact that not much grows here and that everything is imported, that's absolutely crazy to me. And I just feel like there's gotta be ways that we can think about, improving that situation, because it's crazy both from a price perspective but also from a food security perspective, because tomorrow if something happens with the US, then what happens here? Because nothing grows.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Rohan.
I think
Appreciate
Rohan's
it.
ushering us off the stage. I think being in a room of disruptors and innovators, it's very interesting, and I hope people took away some interesting concepts of sustainability and see it from beyond the blue and the green, and see it from more of a future thinking and developing circular and green economies that hopefully our great-great-grandchildren live to see. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Daouii.
Thank you.